moving forward. Okay.
May I ask a
Please.
question, please? How do you define an organization, a nonprofit organization financially stable?
Okay. Stability. They will look to see if you've been able to have a surplus year after year after year that is reasonable for your size, the amount of expenditures you incur in a year, right? You want to be able to afford yourselves year after year and not worry week to week, can I make payroll? Okay? So that's surplus. But they also want to make sure you're taking that surplus and investing it back into your programming. So you don't build a big cash cow and sit on it. You build cash, therefore stability, by having enough cash to have operating reserves of, let's say, minimum 6 months. And I know we have lots of organizations that are so far from that, and that's a big goal. And others who are in that 6 to 12 month range of stability if something goes wrong. God forbid another COVID happens. Your significant programming ends for some reason. Some huge funder changes their grant-making priority, and you go, oh, now what do we do? Well, you want that reserve, okay? So they're gonna look at these kinds of things to get a sense of, are you worth investing in? Each of you is an investment to a donor. They care about your programming, your mission. And so think of your donors also as investors. Okay, so that's a couple things.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. And then we're going to talk a little about what your donors, what you should pay attention to as a board member with your audit and your Form 990, which can be a little daunting, but it can be easy to get to the right things, the most important things. Because if you are able to understand it, then so should you be able to explain it to some of your major donors and be sure that your organization is using these tools to the best of its abilities, because they are tools. They're just not, they are obligations, but they're tools too. And lastly, we'll talk just a little about GuideStar, where probably many of you or all of you may know about GuideStar and how important it is for your organization to have as much and as transparent of information out on the GuideStar website as possible for those donors. All right. So 50% of major donors admit they don't really know how nonprofits use their money. Some people just care about mission and they're going to send you a check. Maybe it's their end of year giving. But you would like those who do know and do care more and therefore hopefully start giving you more. Again, major donor. Bring them from a person who writes a check or goes online on your website every year in December. Move them up. Move them up from that status to major. Katie.
You think of it like a pyramid?
Yes.
And you have your new donors, like that might be under your major gift level, and you try to steward them up.
Stewardship. Yeah, that's the appropriate word. I was just looking online last night to see if there's anything newer or any other information to bring in. And one of the things I was reading was, interesting again. It said 88% of nonprofit funding comes from the top 12% of donors. So in general, we always hear about the 80-20 rule, 80% of the money coming from 20%. This one was even saying 88% from 12%. So whoever's in that 12% pool or 20%, whichever you want to call it, boy, do you want to make sure they understand and want to give and give more. But then there's the rest in the 80. Who's in that next group, right, Katie? Who's next here? You were going to say something.
I just had a comment about that. I'm relatively new to my organization, and historically we've been able to, I don't want to say get by, but utilize the mission as sort of the driver for donors and solicitations, but most recently it's how are you using the dollars and what percentage of that is going into programmatic aspects versus just overhead or administration. And it's really, it's fine for me because I'm relatively new, so I'm sort of like a clean slate, but really educating higher up within the organization, like we need to sort of put this in a different twist and a different perspective, because multiple times throughout just even like 6 months, we were asked for, well, how much of that is going into programming versus, and yeah, we get the mission, we're all for the mission, but what's really the utilization, and it's an interesting driver, and that has been consistent with multiple, like just even grant applications and things that we're doing, that it's really just sort of percentage driven, not even the mission at all.
It is. I'm glad you brought that up. Donors want as much of your funds as is practical to be going towards program. But we all know it takes an executive director and a fundraising staff and other staff that's not totally program driven to run an organization. And so that's a hard message to get across to your donors, that you don't want them to give you money that's just for programming. The best gift is unrestricted. Please meet mission with this. Therefore, you can meet it in any way you need to, right? The best way. There may be donors will not give you an unrestricted gift and say, I will only give it to you for this program. So get it. So that's the only way you're going to get it from them. But it really helps for you to be able to portray your whole organization. And yes, you talk about your program and your outcomes, but it takes the entire organization for it to operate. As the accountant, what I want to say to you is be sure your costs are being properly recorded to program, admin, or fundraising, right? Then there are costs that are shared costs. Your occupancy, your insurance, probably the software. You're all using more software subscriptions. You use them across the organization. Whether you're a file server, you're up on the cloud, all that stuff needs to be allocated across. Be sure that's happening. You don't want it sitting in admin and overburdening the admin percentage. Admin uses a portion of it, not all of it. It doesn't use all the insurance. It doesn't use all the software, etc. Be sure that's happening, because then you have a more appropriate spread of the costs and your information between those very critical 3 percentages: program, admin, fundraising. The other percentage that is often key to donors is, what does it take to earn $1? How many dollars are you spending in fundraising to earn the fundraising dollar? And when they can see that, and it's reasonable, and there's some standards to look at, then they will feel like you are being efficient. They want you to use their funds effectively and efficiently and mission-driven, right? So good points. Lou.
One of the things that has amazed me over the years is that the Better Business Bureau, they have a pretty low threshold.
They do.
And at the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation, we always use like 75 cents out of every dollar ought to be the program.
Minimum, yeah.
But the Better Business Bureau, it's down to like 60 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, it's 60, 65, yeah. It is way too low for what we have seen in the community at large. Your donors aren't expecting a low of 60, 65. They're looking for 75, 80% being program-oriented money. Again, if you're able to be efficient about the way you operate, you probably should be in those ranges, right? Kathy.
So I saw a TED Talk. I was just sitting here trying to remember the name of the guy. Like, it's not coming to me. Possibly. But it was about how really kind of as a country, we don't really understand that the investment in the skills and the quote-unquote overhead that's required to run a successful program
Right.
is part of what these donors are investing in. Is that it?
It's a true statement.
And
It's
so
not well
I'd like-
understood.
I like what you put out there about assigning those costs, but I also think in some ways it's a little bit about, and that's the way to do it, educating the donor that we are able to provide this successful program because we've invested in, this person that has this particular skill or this system that allows us to run more
Right.
efficiently, right? So I think it's also a little bit up to us nonprofits to try to start to educate
It
people
is.
that if we're not making those investments, we're not going to be able to provide a successful program.
Yes.
You can't have a program if you don't have people.
Right. So you can talk to them about the efficiency of your administrative staff as well. If you have HR staff, if you have IT staff, or however you're performing those services, having satisfied employees is important. You can't do that without some level of HR, right? Be it an internal or a consultant. So there's ways to impress upon, in a bigger picture, these things.
So the financials, you don't have to provide a number in the financials, other than you, in the financials, you show software, you show certain things, and you can highlight them in your, I guess, email to them or.
In your case statement,
Yeah,
besides saying, here's the wonderful programs we have, you could say, we're using the latest IT for what we do, and here's why it's so effective.
And so you
Or
think it's-
we have satisfied employees because, if you have satisfied employees and they stay, your program, your work you do is getting done by people who enjoy it, do it well, right? There's some ways to discuss that.
I guess you got to figure out whether it's 70/30 or whether it's 80/20, depending on who you're talking to.
And we'll get to this at the very end, but use GuideStar to compare yourselves with your peer organizations, because you're going to know,
Right?
do I compare well within my peer group? Because if you do, that's a great thing to say within your case statement. In the back?
I was just going to say, as an organization at the YMCA that's very program-centric, we do use, what I'll call sort of proof points or metrics
Yes.
to be able to demonstrate the impact that the dollars are doing with regards to programming, whether it's, CAM,
Of course.
child education, after-school care, whatever it is. And so, Louise, back to your point about allocating some of the admin costs, very, very
Yeah.
important, at least we found, because coming out of COVID, staffing was a major challenge.
Right.
Whether it was camp counselors or lifeguards, whatever it was. And so being able to allocate some of that HR cost, that recruitment cost, so that
Yes.
work was very, very important.
You're recruiting them for a program, not for admin. If you're recruiting an admin person, okay, that could be admin. You have executive directors in the room here. They don't spend their time on just admin. They are focused on program, admin, and fundraising. Their time should be spread according to the way they work. Okay? All right, let's keep moving. So this slide was simply to say that, of this list of things that donors look at, financials is like the third highest. So not unimportant. All righty. Again, when we look at performance of an organization, financial health at the bottom is key. And your donors get information from a variety of sources. They might, if they're a major donor, come and have a site visit. You have a lot of donors who may have never been on site. Your media, your PR, communications, and anything that's written about you is key. Feedback within your community, and then from the financial standpoint, your audited financial statements and your 990. So we're gonna dive into them. All right, the 990 is the federal tax form that every nonprofit is obligated to have submitted to the IRS every year based upon your fiscal year. It tells the readers a lot. So the IRS uses it, but others do too. If any of you have loans, possible building mortgages, your bank's probably asking for it. Your foundations, large foundations who you give proposals to, are usually asking for that as one of the supporting documents as well. Your major donors may ask for it, and donors can go out on GuideStar and see it, whatever the latest and whatever the list of the past 990s are for your organization. They are posted on GuideStar. Whether you've put yourselves on GuideStar or not, your 990s are going to be out there. So people can learn about you. They can compare you to others with whatever information they think is important in your 990. So that's where it is. The IRS has it, and your GuideStar has it too. All right. So let's talk about the 990 itself. What is it, right? So there's areas of information in it. One is you get to tell what your program service areas are and what you've accomplished. Don't take that lightly. That's so important. Don't just write, we're a domestic violence center in Chester County, done. What do you do? How many people did you serve this year? What are your measures and your outcomes that you're reporting for yourselves and for others? Put that in your 990 in the program services. I mean, I've got clients who've got really long statements about what they do. Now, there's a certain, you don't want it so long that nobody reads it, right? Concise enough, complete enough, right? There's the right amount of information depending on what it is you're trying to get across. But get across information about how good your programs are at meeting the mission. There's a section that asks about compensation, and it does allow anybody to look at yours, your 990, and others, any other organizations, and compare, okay? That's one way internally, those of you who are on a board and might be part of the compensation review group for your executive directors or CEOs, that might be a source of information where you see if your key management is being paid similarly to similar organizations, or higher or lower. If they're lower, you got a problem possibly, In the long term, you want to keep someone, you want them to be paid fairly. That's a conversation to have.
I have a question. Isn't the salary commensurable with the budget of the organization? So if the organization has a very relatively low budget and the executive director is making under $100,000, it doesn't even show in the 990. But yet, when you do the comparison with other executive director and other organization, regardless of the budget, they doing a lot of work, but we cannot compensate to that level because of the budget.
And your readers should, if they go out on a GuideStar and use GuideStar to compare 5 organizations, you ought to be able to get a sense of size, right? We'll say this one's twice our size, and maybe they're not so comparable. Here's 3 that are similar in size range, in scope. That's who we might want to compare with. I mean, you have to think about how you compare, right? Of course, your budget drives it, but anybody with a similar budget, you're comparable to in many ways. Right? And you can see that. You can see numbers. You have to report governance in your 990, what your key policies are. The 990 was revamped a number of years ago with the reader in mind. So it made it much more work for you, the organization, and your tax preparer, but it really gave the reader a lot more information to think about what you do. So it asked them, I think there were 4 key policies they wanted to know. Do you have document retention policy, whistleblower policy? I forget the other 2 offhand, but if you weren't saying yes to those by now, oh my God, those were so easy to implement back then and still are. But I'm sure you all have done that long ago. But it does ask about your board? Does it have regular meetings that are documented, via minutes? Key subcommittees documented by minutes. So someone can read this and see, are you governing yourselves well? Even if you're small, you have to govern well right from the start. No excuses. Then there's a bunch of schedules. Schedule A, that's an important one. It explains how you are tax exempt and what your public support is. Now that's a little bit of a complicated calculation, and it doesn't account every dollar you get. There's sort of the with and the without stuff in it, but it is an important number. And you want to know that. Just know it. And know if it's similar year to year or has something really changed about your support. For most of you, your support needs to be, I think it's above 33.33%, which is a really low threshold, no big deal. But if for some reason it would go under, that can be a problem where facts and circumstances would have to be explained to the IRS in terms of, well, why are we not so publicly supported anymore, and what are we doing about it? Okay. And there's a threshold you hit where they go, you're out.
And that's financial.
Financial numbers.
Public support,
Financial, yeah. And it's defined within the matrix, within the schedule of the dollars that go in and the dollars that belong in there and the dollars that get kind of set aside.
I guess that 33% depends on what nonprofit.
What your status is, yeah. So I'm just saying that as a general statement. Don't use that as a, end all, okay? Schedule D gives financial information on how you reconcile between the 990 and your audited financials. They're not always exactly the same. One key thing that's dealt with differently between them is your unrealized gains and losses on investments. They're right there in your face of your audit, and the 990, they're sort of a down below kind of thing. Okay. But overall, what are people getting when they read your 990? The first page is great. It's a summary level so that they don't have to dive in and go, I don't know how to read this thing. They can just see revenues, expenses, gain or loss, and what are your net assets. I love the first page. Take a look at the first page of your 990 if you're not familiar with it. It's a nice, easy to read page. And your donors are going to look at it as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
I think for a donor, right? Maybe I'm not sure if they're gonna go. Maybe a large donor, right? But let's say just regular donor through the 990, the whole thing, because it's a very extensive and complicated.
Very.
And the format is not easy to go through because you have all these lines. And then the boxes at the end. It looks more like a Excel spreadsheet than something that is easy to read. So have you seen any organization doing like an extract of that and put that on a easy form, right? Something that I could just go and see an extract of that, but easy to read. So the donors could go through that and not through the 990.
That's a really great question. I think where people try to do that with the information they think is most valuable is in their annual reports. Every one of you probably has an annual report. Many are electronic now. They used to be big programs and lots of printing costs. Now they're very electronic. But your financial information can be very pictorial in there. There aren't requirements in your annual report how you display it. You could have charts, you could have graphs, you could have a little table. Okay? You decide what you think is the most important for your annual report. Nobody else does.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about the annual report or the impact report. I'm talking about something that when you go into the website and you have, because all this is public, right?
Yeah.
That you have a pre-page to the 990 saying this is what is important.
Well, GuideStar is going to lift it from the IRS website. And the only thing they are very careful to do, that you all should be careful to do too, if you were sharing your 990, is the schedule, I think it's B, that has actual names, addresses, amounts of your larger donors.
Yeah.
They don't show that. And when you share it with outsiders, they shouldn't see it either, because your donors don't expect you to be handing out their names and addresses, right? And this is usually a pretty short list, but it's kind of
But
important.
most often than not, that is in the 990.
It's in your 990, but what you should be asking your tax preparer for is 2 copies of your 990. One, which is the IRS submitted version, complete.
Okay.
You signed it, it went in. The other is called public disclosure version. It redacts that very confidential information.
Okay.
That's what I would share with donors, foundations who ask for your 990. Okay? I wouldn't give the one that has those things.
Most people don't do that because if you go to any of the 990s for a nonprofit organization, you'll find a list of donors.
But not on GuideStar. You will not see that on GuideStar. If you ask for it, a lot of people will hand it out because they don't know that to ask for the second version, the public disclosure version, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. These couple slides are really useful. I would maybe earmark it in your booklet because this tells you, a couple things and asks some key questions that you as a board would want to ask. So, maybe you take these there's 2 pages, and maybe this is a topic at one of your board meetings, a learning session. Maybe your treasurer could lead it. Maybe your ED. Maybe ask your auditor to come in and chat and say, can you walk us through these key things so that everybody has a reasonable general understanding of the 990? Okay, I mean, we've talked about, there's the summary page, then we talked about the importance of program service, accomplishments being well-written. There's a bunch of checklists. Now, those, the executive director should carefully review, and thank you. When that 990 comes back from the tax accountant, you want to make sure those answers are correct. They're your answers. They're not the tax accountant's answers. They're answering them for you to the best of their ability of what they know. And if you forgot to share something with them during the audit or during some tax prep questions, it's not their fault, it's yours. So you have to read, you being the ED, right? And whoever is your financial staff should be reading this to say, oh yeah, everything's right. The questions are easy. You don't have to be financially oriented to know if your answers to these questions, the checklist questions, are right or wrong, okay? And then those answers drive, oh, is another schedule needed? Do you have fundraising events? Yes. Oh, another schedule's needed. Do you have this? Oh, another schedule's needed, right? That's what a lot of the checklist does. We talked about the governance type of questions that, again, those are correct because you know they're correct, not because the preparer does. The compensation, then it does get into your revenues by type in terms of the way the IRS requires it to be reflected in the document. So the tax preparer takes your revenue per your audited financials and they are going to put it in the right lines for the tax return. They're going to do the same thing with your expenses, okay? Statement of functional expenses. This gets back to what I said at the beginning about making sure your shared costs get allocated. Functional expenses means what are your expenses by key program categories? Could be one program or could be multiple. But what are your program costs? What are your admin costs? And what are your fundraising costs? And if there's any organization who has nothing in a fundraising column, it doesn't make sense to me. Something not being done right. Somebody spends even a little time. Somebody spends some time, right? And a few dollars.
But board members spend a lot of time.
You're not costed into the statements. You're a volunteer and you're expected to be a volunteer.
So the staff doesn't participate That's enough, there's only one executive director.
Right. That's who I'd expect to have some of that person's time, whatever their payroll is. Let's say they spend 10% of their time helping with fundraising. I'd expect to see 10% of their payroll and benefits in fundraising, right? Simple example. And you got to a good point where you're talking about board members. Board members are expected to volunteer in your roles on the board and in your subcommittees. But if you have professionals who are donating actual services that you would have had to buy, and they're the people who are in that field, those are called in-kind services or donated services. They are normally recorded within your financial statements. They don't have a bottom line impact because they're a gift and an expense of the same exact amount, okay? So let's say you had an attorney who was a friend and was willing to do some legal work for your organization. They can tell you what that was valued at. They have to record time and they have a rate. They can tell you at the end of the year, I spent X dollars and X hours on you for free. And if that's what you would have had to spend, that becomes an in-kind or donated type of
So
contribution.
this might be an irrelevant question, but so when you have somebody in the staff that does that kind of work, and again, I agree with you, they volunteer their time. If they make $3.50 an hour, and they put X number of hours, that's significant. Some of the nonprofit organizations do have a requirement for the board member, give or get.
Yes.
So when we think about that or calculate that, how does that get measured per se?
So that is measured by the fundraising staff, your give or get, actual to goal. Any actual contributions you make, of course, they're in the financial records. Any actual contribution someone makes that you identified and brought in, it's in the financials. But in terms of, did you meet your give or get, that's the fundraising department's responsibility to monitor each of you as an individual and a group. Go ahead.
You had said something about development in particular, and other folks within an organization are assist with development other than just your development, pure development.
Yes.
So, for example, the financial person or the CEO or the ED, a certain percentage of their compensation should be spread across.
It should.
That okay.
Yeah. Preferably timesheet, actual driven, but I realize a lot of organizations don't do that. And so if you're doing estimates, you do the best estimate you can. And you'll know, if you're required to do timesheets, you'll know it because maybe you have a government grant and whoever helps you with accounting says, oh, sorry, your estimates are no good anymore. You have to do actual time reporting. But it can be an estimate in many cases.
Even as you're allocating that across any of your grant funding sources, I'm just kind of thinking out loud for you.
Sure.
It should still be spread out across administrative functions too, not just.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whoever's really doing that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not looking at the reality of your picture, right? So you do the best you can. If you're an organization that just does estimates, I hope you're doing it within the budget first, and then using it within your actual account, financial record keeping too. Okay. Bob?
I just want to emphasize how important this 990 is.
Yes.
Because if you're out asking for any grants or you're working with any major donors, they're going to be looking at your 990. And Katie, I'll guarantee you, I look at your 990 every year. But also, I can't encourage you enough to sit down with the board each year and go through your 990. The board needs to understand that. They're not all accountants, but they need to understand what's on there. And I'd like to give one example, and I don't think we have anybody here from Good Works. Do we?
I don't
But,
think.
but I think Good Works is a great example, and those of you that are not familiar with it, it's an organization that makes homes safer, warmer, drier for underprivileged folks throughout the county. And Good Works doesn't fit all these boxes perfectly because there's so many donated hours that they have to administer, and their administration looks larger percentage than it should because they've got all these thousands of volunteer hours that they have to manage. So, and no offense to the CPAs, but remember, they're completing these forms for you. And they're doing it for hundreds of nonprofits. And your explanation on your 990 as to what you do can help explain why you don't fit all the boxes perfectly.
Good point.
So taking time to see what that says and taking ownership of it. This is not your accountant's responsibility.
Right.
This is your board's responsibility. And taking ownership of it, reading through it, and understanding what it says is a huge long-term advantage. If you use it appropriately.
And I'm going to add to that, not only your 990, but your audited financial statements. There are notes in there. The first note explains who you are, what you do. Again, that's your responsibility, and it ought to be pretty similar between the audit and the 990. I've seen people just ignore them for years, and they're stale. They may not even sometimes be the current way the mission is articulated. But again, it's yours.
And if I could just add to what Tom's saying, as an ED, I came from a very large organization. So I had CFO, I had a financial team, and then I came to a smaller organization. So now I am the CFO, the executive director. So remember, if you are a small organization and your ED, they're trying to do everything. So like for me to be here, so I can get better at this because 990, I'm working with for organization or a company, but I know I can get better at it. But I also involve my finance committee so that they help and they're really heavily a part of that before we submit it. And then we also make sure the board approves it as well. So that's so those are things that I brought to make sure that they understood the fiduciary responsibility and that I'm not just doing it. But I know I gotta get better at it as a small organization, as an ED.
Yes.
I'm with Chester County Future.
And so,
I have been with the Greater Philadelphia YMCA, one of the largest YMCA's in Pennsylvania, so we have like a huge, big team.
and so, adding to what Bob and Katie just shared with us, those of you who are board members, you hold a responsibility for your 990. Don't take that lightly. No, it's as a group. It's not as an individual, but as a group. In your organization, I'm sure, has directors and officers insurance to have you, well protected as a group. But you are responsible for it. So be sure that when that audit is complete, audited financial statements have been reviewed internally and they're completed, the 990's been completed, reviewed internally, that they are presented to you, the board. And usually the auditor, key partner, is always willing to come in, speak with the board, try to do it in layman's words, right? Instead of accounting speak or tax speak, and you get a lot more out of it. So if you're not getting that every year, ask your ED, hey, I think we need to get this presentation.
I would just add, as a slightly larger organization, we also have an audit committee that we chair, separate from the finance committee. And I think this point that you made about having the auditors come in and, regardless of what size you are, whether they come in and speak to the audit committee or whether they come in and speak to the full board, that's a really important, I'll use the word control point.
It is.
But and regardless of what materials they share, as we are asking the auditor to, in layman's terms, explain what the financials are telling us, I think is important.
Yes.
Especially for those on the board that are more active in the philanthropy part of
Yeah.
fundraising as well.
And the good ones will compute some of those metrics. And when you listen to them, say to yourself, should we be seeing those metrics throughout the year? Should those metrics be on our annual report, right? Where is our information? And people like metrics. Metrics are easy. Big financial statements are hard to understand, right?
And not all board members are financial people.
No.
So the nice thing is they can support the 990 and understand the 990 and say this doesn't work and
Right.
question the financial.
Yes, you are right.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to GuideStar. So this, the question is, where do your donors see and use this information? So here on this slide are the various organizations that are using GuideStar's information, okay? So it's not inconsequential, is I think the point I'd like to make. And you as an organization have the opportunity to put information in there, and if you already have it in there, you have the opportunity to improve it. So you can be a bronze level as far as transparency, or you can get all the way to platinum. And you've put more out, more information in there. You've put the investment in, and you keep it up to date. So that's really on each organization to do that.
And there's forms in there for each level, information you got to provide to get to.
Right.
Is there a different cost structure part of that?
I don't think you pay as the organization to be putting your information in there and moving it up. I don't think. I don't know exactly, but
There's two levels to GuideStar that you have access to. One's free, and I recommend you all go out on GuideStar this weekend and take a look at it, and take a look at your organization. And then there's another level up that you pay for, but there's no charge that I'm aware of for your organization to be in it.
yeah,
But that next level up gives an awful lot of information. And if by chance you don't want to pay for it and get that next level up, you can go to the community foundation and ask for it from your own organization, and they'll give you that next level up. Karen may shoot me.
Just walks by.
Yeah.
no,
That's classified.
But the point of it is they pay for that next level up, and there's ways to get it.
yeah. And what they're paying for is, as the user, to have more access to the information, right? Not you, the organization, entering and keeping your information up to date. It's that those, users back here. Let's see if I can go back. These are the people paying for
Yep.
the big bucks, okay? But yeah, the community foundation does have an account, and sometimes they'll even share it with you to just use. Go find out what you need to, and then you're done. I mean, it doesn't cost the foundation any more to let you use that account. Okay. Okay, so, again, this is talking about what can you do? You're reaching millions of funders by just having your profile out there and well, set up. So you're encouraged to claim your free profile, share your story, and, do the updates. Here's the steps, Kane. Claim your profile, get approved, tell your story, okay? And then here's some comments about what people are saying. And, I kind of like this third one where this was a grant writer who said, our candid profile probably saves us 40 hours a week. We're constantly asked for our financials, details about our mission, etc. Sending people to our nonprofit profile on GuideStar, right, frees us up to focus on our mission. So you can send your donors to GuideStar, right? You communicate with your donors all the time via email, and many other ways. Maybe you, when you have a good solid profile, that's something to say. Hey, have you taken a look at our guard star profile? It says this. You know, here's the link. Your data's out there. You spent the time on it. So this person's saying, I don't regurgitate it to 100 different people. I send them where I put it. Nicely, carefully. So, all right. So what kind of information do people see when they go out there? So this is an example of an organization, Audubon. Top left, you can see it's reporting their revenues. And then, you know, in total, right, 1.8 million. And then, oh, by the way, what sources were those revenues? How much in contributions? How much in government grants? Program services. Then they get into investments. You know, how much did you make on your investments? They had sales, probably had some kind of gift store, I don't know. So a donor can look here, or just a reader. They may not even be your donor yet, right? They can see the numbers by type, and they can see, you know, a quick chart that makes it easy to say, where did most of the money come from? Well, in this case, contributions. Then also your expenses are reported, and there's those three major categories, everybody: program, admin, fundraising. So you can see how much it's taking. Bless you. It is the season, isn't it? Then there's other information as well, where we talked about a little bit of stability. It reports months of cash. How many months of expenses do you have in cash right now? It's a point in time. Well, this one's pretty tough. It says one. If that's 1 month's cash, this organization is in tough shape, but it seems awfully low to me. The fringe rate, that helps your donor get a general sense if you are fair to your employees. Are you compensating them not only with the salary, but then also, you know, with some reasonable benefits, okay? And then other charts down below, again, the funding sources and a sense of assets and liabilities over a period of time. So a little picture, a history that someone can take a look at as it relates to your organization.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you think that for the donors, it is important to, or really matters, to know where the funds of the organization come from? And I'm asking this because I'm on the fund for Women's and Girls, but I'm also on another nonprofit in Montgomery County, which is a CLAM, right? Mm-hmm. So down there, it's probably 90% federal government and county funding, right? On the fund for Women's and Girls are individual donors. So if I am an individual donor and I see that you're getting, you know, X amount of millions from federal funding, I feel like I'm the tiny one, so why my funding matters, right? But then when I am on the other side, I see that how can I increase that, or how could it change? Like, is there like a way for a ratio that would make having a healthy organization when you split, you know, the way you get your revenue?
That's a very good question. Good topic is the diversity of your funding. Mm-hmm. So your potential donor is going to look at the organization that's heavily government funded and see a lack of diversity, a really strong dependence on that federal funding or governmental funding. Now, maybe because of the kind of organization it is, maybe that's okay. Doesn't mean it's bad. What it does mean is you do not have funding from other sources at sufficient percentages of the funding such that if that starts to fall out, you have others to rely on. So that one organization, if something goes wrong and they don't have good financial stability, a big reserve, wow. Staff cuts, you know, program cutbacks, it all starts happening. If you have diversity of funding, individuals, foundations, corporations, governmental, one falls out for some reason, you're not in as difficult a position.
And in your experience as a CPA, person who works on the financials,
Yes.
is there any ratio that you would think this is the healthiest thing to do for an organization?
I don't have definite ratios to share. There isn't anything I know of. Lou, would you have anything?
The rule of thumb that we used at the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation was that you shouldn't have any more dependents than about 20% from any one source.
Okay.
Preferably a little less, but that would be the top.
From one source. So that meaning one foundation, one corporation, or group.
One business, corporation,
Okay.
one foundation,
All right.
one federal grant.
One grant, right.
We actually
Right.
tested, there was, one of the things we asked for was there about 12 different avenues or streams of funding.
Okay.
And we was asking them to put percentage, and it didn't have to have all 12 filled out, but enough to show that there was diversity.
Diversity. Okay. So that's important. So he's saying 20% as a possible measurement from a source, a corporation, a foundation, a government grant. Not the government grants in total, but one, right?
Yeah, I think with
Right.
government grants, it's just really important to recognize that the source may be common, right? So pre-COVID, I
Yes.
think a lot of us were struggling with government funding was down. And so even at the county and the state level, even though there were multiple grants, the reality is it was all down. And so that concentration was quite bothersome for a number of reasons that I was affiliated with.
And I think what a lot of you have to think about right now, at least in the last year and this year, I know quite a few of our clients came out of COVID with, thank God, PPP loans, shuttered venue operator grants for the arts, and then the ARPA grants. Well, those ARPA grants are starting to come to an end. Have you figured out how you're going to continue to fund what those ARPA grants were funding? That's a big question.
I just wanted to comment that restricted funding sources in any particular category is also going to obviously restrict how you can spend it.
Of course.
And limit your just general operating and unrestricted expenses. So
Yes, thank you for sharing that. All of you do know you receive some gifts that are completely unrestricted and available to meet mission. And then you receive gifts from donors. Only donors can restrict. Donors can restrict to program and to time, to a particular kind of expense, and you need to track it and, be able to prove you spent it that way, okay? All right, a couple more slides. We're almost done. It's 11:11. We're right on time. All right, so I think someone was asking about this. How do I compare? The foundation has that higher level of a GuideStar package, and they are able to pick, 4 or 5, in this case, senior centers, and see how they did compared to themselves. It computes a median, a peer median, and a cohort median. And you see different things. Profitability, revenue composition, you asked about that, Marisol. Expense composition, this is now by nature of expense instead of functional. It's by nature, being like personnel, professional fees, occupancy, etc. Your capital structure, what is your liquidity? How many months do you have of cash? Big thing. If you don't know that, go back and find out how many months of cash are you all holding, and particularly unrestricted cash, right? And then, what does your balance sheet, or again, we use the phrase statement of financial position in the nonprofit world. How much cash? How much investments, receivables, property? Some. And of your net assets, how much is unrestricted, completely usable, temporarily restricted by a donor for purpose or time, or permanently restricted by a donor, meaning you only will most likely be using the earnings. Okay? All right, take our last 2 minutes and see if there's anything we didn't answer. So looking at this list, anything anyone would like to further discuss or ask a specific question we didn't get to that you were hoping to?
Louise, for those of us that have, sort of heavy capitals, whether it's warehouses or facilities or when a donor is looking at financial statements, is there a particular one or two line items or metric that they're looking for to see if we're sitting on things that are really going to come home to roost in the future? Could be a problem.
I love that question. If you're heavy in capital, you have a building, or buildings in your case, right? Swimming pools, a lot of, so you've got the capital, you've sunk money into your facilities because that's what you need. You have a bunch of occupancy expenses. All right, one thing I recommend folks do on their statement of financial position in the unrestricted net assets, I like to subcategorize it, capital, the net value of your property and equipment should be a subcategory in there because it's not spendable. You look filthy rich. You're not. You have fixed assets, right? So I usually say take those unrestricted net assets and you have what's truly unrestricted, and then we usually use the phrase invested in property, okay? And it's the net after accumulated depreciation, the value of it, right? Not value, but cost less depreciation, because we can't do fair market value with those assets. To me, that helps a reader recognize that all that money isn't usable. It's invested to perform programmatic activities. And then on the other side, with the expenses, you might look at, is there a way to carve up your occupancy expenses when you're presenting them such that it's more meaningful because you are so capital heavy. They're the two places I see that. All right, we'll call it a wrap. If anybody has other questions, feel free.